When Ryder Hale's mail-order bride stepped off that stagecoach in Montana territory, he took one look at her Chinese face and told her to get back on. He'd been promised plain and forgettable, someone who'd keep house and stay quiet. Instead, Lin Mei stood in the frozen dirt with fire in her eyes and offered him 30 days to see if she could survive his ranch, his silence, and his rage. What neither of them knew was that a neighboring rancher was already sharpening his knives, ready to destroy them both. This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Clemens, Montana territory, throwing up a cloud of dust that hung in the November air like dirty lace. Ryder Hale stood on the boardwalk with his hat pulled low, shoulders tight beneath his worn coat, trying not to look like a man who'd spent the last 3 months regretting a decision made in whiskey and loneliness. He'd written to the agency in Sacramento. He'd paid the fee. He'd told himself it was practical. Nothing more than hiring help that wouldn't quit when winter came. A woman to cook, men, keep the cabin from feeling like a tomb. Plain, the letter had said. Sturdy. Someone past the age of foolish dreams. The stage door swung open. Ryder's breath stopped. The woman who stepped down wasn't plain. She wasn't forgettable. She was Chinese, straight black hair pinned tight beneath a simple blue bonnet, skin like polished oak, eyes dark and steady as river stones. She wore a gray wool dress that had seen hard travel, and she moved with the kind of careful dignity that came from knowing people were always watching, always judging. She looked directly at him. Ryder felt his gut clench. This wasn't what he'd asked for. This wasn't what he'd paid for. This was trouble he didn't need, couldn't afford, wouldn't survive. Mr. Hale? Her voice was quiet, accented, but clear. He didn't answer. Couldn't. His mind was racing ahead to what the town would say, what Silas Mercer would do with this, what kind of hell he'd just invited into his life by not specifying white on that damned form. I am Lin Mei. She stood perfectly still, hands folded at her waist, waiting. Ryder found his voice. It came out harder than he meant it to. You need to get back on that stage. Her expression didn't change. The agent said you requested a bride. I requested someone who'd fit here. He gestured vaguely toward the town behind him, clapboard storefronts, a church with a crooked steeple, men already gathering on the far side of the street to stare. You don't. You have not asked me to fit, Lin Mei said calmly. You have only told me to leave. Same thing. It is not. The stage driver cleared his throat, impatient. You want her trunk or not, Hale? Ryder looked at the battered leather trunk strapped to the back of the coach, everything this woman owned in the world, probably. He thought about his ranch 15 miles out in the valley, where the wind came down from the mountains like a fist. He thought about the long winter ahead, the cattle that needed tending, the fence lines that wanted mending, the empty cabin that echoed when he walked through it. He thought about Silas Mercer's last visit 3 weeks back, leaning against the porch rail with that smile that wasn't a smile at all. You're alone out here, Hale. Smart man would sell before the snow comes. Ryder looked back at Lin Mei. I can't marry you. Then do not. That stopped him. What? Give me 30 days, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not begging, not pleading, just a quiet fierceness that reminded him of how winter light looked on new snow. 30 days on your ranch. I will work. You will see what I can do. If I fail, I leave. If I succeed, you will decide again. That's not how this works. How does it work? Lin Mei tilted her head slightly. You send money for a wife you do not want to meet. I travel 2,000 miles to a place that does not want me. The agent keeps his fee either way. So I'm asking, give me 30 days to prove I'm worth more than your fear. Ryder felt something hot and ugly rise in his chest. I'm not afraid. You are. She said it without malice, like she was commenting on the weather. But I'm also afraid. So we are equal. Somewhere down the street, a man laughed. Ryder heard his name on the wind, heard the tone that promised this moment would be all over the valley by nightfall. Hale ordered himself a celestial bride. Wonder what he's going to do with her. He looked at Lin Mei again. Really looked this time. Saw the way she held herself like she expected nothing and feared nothing. saw the dust on her dress from 2 weeks of hard travel, saw hands that weren't soft, weren't delicate, weren't the hands of someone who'd spent her life being decorative. 30 days, he heard himself say. You work, you pull your weight, you don't complain, don't slow me down, don't expect anything but a roof and food. After 30 days, if you want to stay, we'll talk. If you want to leave, I'll pay your passage to anywhere you want to go. Agreed. And we're not married, not until I say so. Agreed. Ryder turned to the driver. Bring the trunk. The ride out to the ranch took 3 hours. Ryder drove the wagon in silence, and Lin Mei sat beside him without speaking, watching the valley unfold around them. Wide grassland turning brown and brittle under autumn's fist, mountains rising in the west like broken teeth, sky so big and empty it made a person feel like nothing at all. She didn't ask questions, didn't comment on the cold, the distance, the way the wind cut through fabric like it had a personal grudge, just sat with her hands folded in her lap, back straight, eyes taking in everything. Ryder broke the silence once. You ever worked a ranch before? No. You know anything about cattle? Horses? No. Can you cook? Yes. Sew? Yes. Shoot? Lin Mei looked at him for the first time since they'd left town. If you teach me. Ryder grunted and said nothing more. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a cabin built from split logs and stubbornness, a barn that leaned slightly to the north, a corral holding 6 horses and a dozen head of cattle. It wasn't much. Ryder knew that. But it was his, bought with Union Army pay and 12 years of bleeding into dirt that didn't care who owned it. He pulled the wagon up to the cabin and climbed down without offering to help Lin Mei. She got down on her own, steady and sure, and stood looking at the place like she was measuring it. Cabin's got 2 rooms, Ryder said, dragging her trunk off the wagon bed. You take the back one. I'll sleep out here by the stove. That is not necessary. It is. He set the trunk down harder than he needed to. 30 days, you said. 30 days, we're not married, which means you get your own space and I get mine. Understood? Lin Mei met his eyes. Understood? Good. Ryder pushed the cabin door open and hauled the trunk inside. The place smelled like old smoke and older loneliness, a scent he'd stopped noticing years ago. He set the trunk beside the door to the back room, then stepped aside. You can settle in. Supper's at sundown. I'll be in the barn. He left before she could answer. Outside, Ryder leaned against the corral fence and tried to convince himself he hadn't just made the worst mistake of his life. A Chinese woman. On his ranch. In Montana Territory, where people still talked about the railroad riots in '77, where men like Silas Mercer looked for any excuse to call a man weak or traitorous, or fool enough to lose everything. He thought about riding back to town, telling the agent there'd been a mistake, putting Lin Mei on the next stage east. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't. Because 30 days wasn't just her testing him. It was him testing whether he was as broken as he believed. The cabin door opened. Lin Mei stepped out, wearing the same gray dress, but with her sleeves rolled up and her bonnet gone. She walked to the woodpile near the barn, selected a piece of split pine, and brought it back to the porch. Ryder watched her. What are you doing? Making supper. She looked at him like the answer was obvious. You said sundown. I'll handle it. You agreed to let me work, Lin Mei said. This is work. She went inside before he could argue. Ryder stood there in the cold, wind pulling at his coat, and wondered what the hell he'd agreed to. Supper was rice and salt pork, cooked in a way Ryder didn't recognize but tasted better than anything he'd made in months. Lin Mei served it without comment, then sat across from him at the rough plank table and ate in silence. Ryder tried not to stare, tried not to notice the precise way she handled her fork, the way she sat without slouching, the way her eyes flicked around the cabin, cataloging, assessing, understanding. You got people in California? He asked, more to fill the silence than anything. No. Family back in China? No. Ryder waited, but she didn't elaborate. He tried again. So why come all the way out here? Lin Mei set down her fork and looked at him. Why did you send for a bride you do not want? I didn't say I don't want. He stopped. She was right. He didn't want this. Didn't want the complication, the risk, the chance that something good might walk into his life just to leave again. I needed help. So do I. Help with what? Staying alive, Lin Mei said simply. In San Francisco, I worked in a boarding house. The owner sold it. The new owner wanted different arrangements. I could accept those arrangements or I could leave. I chose to leave. Ryder heard what she wasn't saying, felt something ugly twist in his chest. So you figured marriage was safer? I figured a contract was safer than charity, she said, and a ranch was safer than a city where no one sees you as anything but what they want to take. She stood, gathered the plates, and carried them to the basin. Ryder sat there feeling like he'd been gutted and didn't know how to stop the bleeding. 30 days, Lin Mei said quietly, her back to him. That is all I ask. 30 days to prove I am not what you fear. And what do you think I fear? She turned, and in the dim lamplight, her face was steady and sad and far too knowing. The same thing I do, that if we let ourselves hope, it will be taken from us. Ryder had no answer to that. The first week, he tested her. He woke her before dawn and sent her to feed the horses. She did it without complaint, even when the gelding bit her hand hard enough to draw blood. She wrapped it in a rag and finished the job. He made her haul firewood until her hands blistered. She hauled it. He sent her to muck out stalls, mend fence, scrub pots, beat rugs, churn butter. She did all of it with the same quiet intensity, learning as she went, asking only the questions that mattered. Why do you stack the wood this way? So it dries and doesn't rot. Why do you check the horse's hooves every morning? So you catch stones and cracks before they go lame. She remembered everything, took nothing for granted, wasted no motion. By the end of the week, Ryder stopped testing her and started wondering how long she'd last before the work broke her. It didn't. The second week, the weather turned. Snow came down from the mountains in a wall of white that erased the valley and turned the ranch into an island. The temperature dropped so fast the water in the trough froze solid overnight. Ryder spent 2 days chopping ice and hauling feed to the cattle, and Lin Mei was beside him the whole time, face red with cold, breath steaming, hands shaking, but moving, always moving. On the third night of the storm, the barn door blew open and spooked the horses. Ryder ran out into the blizzard to calm them, and Lin Mei followed without being asked. Together they got the animals settled, got the door barred, and stumbled back to the cabin half frozen. Inside, Lin Mei collapsed into a chair, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Ryder threw more wood on the stove and shoved a cup of hot coffee into her hands. Drink. She drank, fingers wrapped tight around the tin, steam rising into her face. You should have stayed inside, Ryder said. You needed help. I've handled worse alone. That does not mean you should have to. Ryder stared at her. Snow was melting in her hair, dripping onto her shoulders. Her lips were blue. She looked half dead and entirely unbowed. You're going to freeze to death out here, he said quietly. So will you, Lin Mei answered, so we do not let each other. Something cracked open in Ryder's chest, something he'd kept frozen for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He turned away before she could see it. The third week, Silas Mercer came calling. Ryder was replacing a rotted section of the corral fence when he saw the 3 riders coming up the valley. Mercer, in the lead on his big roan stallion, 2 hired men flanking him like wolves. Lin Mei was hanging laundry on a line strung between the cabin and the barn. She stopped when she saw them, hands still on a wet shirt, eyes tracking the riders with the stillness of prey that knows it's been spotted. Ryder set down his hammer and walked to the front of the cabin, making sure he was between Mercer and the door. Mercer reined up 10 feet away and smiled down at him, all teeth, no warmth. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, face weathered and hard. The kind of man who'd learned early that size and money could take him anywhere he wanted to go. Hail, Mercer said. Heard you had a visitor. News travels fast. It does when it's interesting. Mercer's eyes slid past Ryder to Lin Mei, still standing by the laundry line. That the Celestial Bride folks are talking about? That's my business. It's the Valley's business when a man brings in foreign labor, Mercer said. Sets a bad precedent. She's not labor. She's my wife. The lie came out before Ryder could stop it, and he saw Lin Mei's head turn slightly toward him. Surprise, maybe, or something else. Mercer's smile widened. Your wife? Well, congratulations, Hale. Didn't know you were the marrying kind. Didn't know I needed your approval. You don't. Mercer leaned forward in his saddle. leather creaking. But you do need to think about how things look. You're out here alone, well, not alone anymore, on a piece of land a lot of people have interest in. People who don't take kindly to outsiders. She's not an outsider. She's my wife. She's Chinese, Mercer said flatly, which makes her about as outside as you can get, and it makes you look weak, desperate, like a man who can't hold his own. Ryder felt his jaw tighten. You finished? Just getting started. Mercer straightened, glanced at his men. I'm here as a neighbor, Hale. Friendly advice. The land company I work with, Montana Trust and Development, they're buying up properties all through this valley. Good prices, fair prices, and they're especially interested in your spread. You sell now, you walk away clean. You hold on. He shrugged. Winter's coming. Things get hard. Accidents happen. I'm not selling. You should think about it. I have. Answer's still no. Mercer's smile finally died. Then you're a fool. He yanked his horse around and spurred it back toward the valley trail, his men following. Ryder stood there watching until they disappeared over the rise, then turned and found Lin Mei standing right behind him. You should not have called me your wife, she said quietly. I know. It will make things harder for you. I know that too. Lin Mei studied his face. Then why did you say it? Ryder looked at her. This woman who'd hauled wood and chopped ice and stood in a blizzard beside him without flinching. This woman who'd asked for 30 days and hadn't wasted a single one. Because he doesn't get to decide what you are, Ryder said. Nobody does but you. Lin Mei held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them that didn't have a name yet, but felt like the start of one. Thank you, she said. Then she turned and went back to the laundry. Ryder stood there in the cold, heart pounding, wondering when exactly he'd stopped seeing her as a mistake and started seeing her as the only right thing he'd done in years. That night, Lin Mei asked him about the scar. They were sitting by the stove after supper, Ryder cleaning his rifle, Lin Mei mending a shirt torn during the fence work. The wind was howling outside, rattling the shutters, and the lamplight made shadows dance across the cabin walls. The scar on your face, Lin Mei said without looking up from her stitching. How did you get it? Ryder's hand went to his cheek before he could stop it, the long, ragged line that ran from his left eye to his jaw, a permanent reminder of things he'd spent 12 years trying to forget. War, he said. Which war? The one that mattered. Lin Mei set down the shirt and looked at him. Will you tell me? Why do you want to know? Because you wear it like armor, she said, and I want to understand what you are protecting. Ryder put down the rifle, stared at the stove, tried to find words for things he'd never said out loud. I was at Cold Harbor, he said finally. Virginia, June of '64. We charged Confederate lines across open ground, and they cut us down like wheat. I took a saber across the face, woke up 3 days later in a field hospital. Half my company was dead. The other half wished they were. Lin Mei waited. After the war, I came west. Figured I'd leave all that behind. The killing, the dying, the feeling that nothing you did mattered because it'd all be gone tomorrow. Ryder's voice was rough. Met a woman in Denver, Sarah. She was a school teacher, kind, patient, made me believe I could be something other than broken. What happened to her? Cholera, 1873. She died in 3 days, and I buried her on a hillside outside Boulder. Ryder finally looked at Lin Mei. So I came here, built this place, told myself I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone, because wanting just meant losing. And now? Lin Mei asked softly. Now I don't know what I believe anymore. The fire crackled, the wind screamed. Lin Mei picked up her stitching again. My mother once told me that scars are proof we survived what tried to kill us. Not armor. Evidence. Evidence of what? That we are stronger than our fear. Whoosh! Ryder felt something break open inside him, something that had been locked tight for so long it hurt to let it out. I'm glad you stayed, he said. Lin Mei looked up, and in her eyes, he saw the same raw, fragile hope he felt. So am I. The 4th week brought the first real test. Ryder woke to the sound of cattle bawling in panic. He was out of bed and pulling on his boots before he was fully awake, grabbing his rifle from beside the door. Lin Mei appeared in the doorway of her room, hair loose, wearing her nightdress and a shawl. "What is it?" she asked. "Don't know. Stay inside." "I'm coming with you." I am coming with you." There was no time to argue. Ryder threw open the door and ran toward the corral, Lin Mei right behind him. The cattle were milling and bellowing, and in the moonlight Ryder saw why. The fence on the east side had been cut, and 6 head were already gone. "Rustlers," he said. "Mercer?" "Most likely." Ryder scanned the darkness beyond the fence, saw nothing, but they were out there, watching, waiting to see what he'd do. Lin Mei touched his arm. "We need to follow them. It's too dangerous. It is more dangerous to let them think you will do nothing." Her voice was steady. "If you do not go, they will come back. Again and again. Until you have nothing left." Ryder looked at her. This woman who'd been on his ranch less than a month and already understood the rules of survival better than most men he knew. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "I will learn now." They saddled 2 horses and rode out into the night, following the trail left by 6 head of cattle and at least 3 riders. The moon was high and bright, turning the valley silver, and Ryder could track them easily enough, northwest, toward the breaks where the land turned rough and broken. Lin Mei rode behind him, awkward but determined, learning by necessity. They found the cattle 2 hours later, penned in a makeshift corral near a dry wash. 3 men were standing around a fire, passing a bottle. Ryder reined up on a ridge overlooking the camp and studied them. He recognized 2 hired guns Mercer used for jobs he didn't want traced back to him. The third was a stranger. "What do we do?" Lin Mei whispered. Ryder thought about it, thought about riding down there with his rifle and taking back what was his. Thought about the bullet that would likely follow. Thought about Lin Mei beside him, learning to ride in the dark because she refused to let him face this alone. "We go back," he said. "But we go back," Ryder repeated. "And tomorrow, I ride into town and report the theft. Make it official. Put Mercer's name on paper." "That will not get your cattle back." "No, but it'll make him think twice before he does it again." Ryder looked at her. "And it'll keep you alive. Which matters more?" Lin Mei held his gaze, then nodded. They rode back in silence, and when they reached the ranch at dawn, Ryder realized something had shifted. He'd made a choice, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because protecting what mattered was more important than pride. And what mattered was her. On the 29th day, Lin Mei asked him a question. They were sitting on the porch in the late afternoon, watching the light turn gold across the valley. The air was cold and sharp, but the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. "Tomorrow is 30 days, she said. "I know." "What have you decided?" Ryder looked at her, saw the woman who'd hauled wood and chopped ice and ridden into the night beside him, saw the strength, the quiet fierceness, the refusal to break, saw everything he'd been too afraid to hope for. "I decided a week ago," he said. "And?" "Stay," Ryder said. "If you want to. Not as help, not as a contract, as my wife. For real this time." Lin Mei was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "I need to know something first." "What?" "Are you asking because you want me," she said slowly, "or because you are afraid to be alone?" It was the hardest question anyone had ever asked him. Ryder thought about Sarah, buried on that hillside, thought about Cold Harbor and all the men who'd died screaming, thought about 12 years of building walls so high nothing could reach him. Then he thought about Lin Mei standing in the blizzard, calm in the face of Mercer's threats, riding through the night because she refused to let him face danger alone. "Both," he said honestly. "I'm asking because I want you, and because I'm tired of being afraid." Lin Mei turned to look at him, and her eyes were full of something he couldn't name. "Then I will stay," she said. They were married 2 days later in the cabin, with the foreman from a neighboring ranch and his wife as witnesses. No church, no crowd. Just a quiet promise made in front of people who understood that survival and love weren't opposites. They were the same thing. That night, lying beside Ryder in the darkness, Lin Mei spoke into the silence. "When I was a girl in Guangdong, my father told me that the strongest trees grow in the hardest ground. I did not understand then, but I do now." Ryder pulled her closer. "What made you understand?" "You," she said. This place. The knowledge that beauty is not fragile. It is what survives when everything else is taken away. Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains. Inside, two people who'd been broken by the world held each other and believed, for the first time in years, that they might be strong enough to build something that would last. They were wrong about one thing. The hardest test was still coming. Winter came to the valley like a fist closing around bone. The snow that had threatened for weeks finally arrived in earnest, piling against the cabin walls and turning the world into something white and silent and unforgiving. Ryder and Lin Mei worked through December like soldiers preparing for siege, splitting wood until their backs screamed, hauling hay to the barn, checking cattle twice a day to make sure none had wandered into drifts they couldn't escape. Marriage hadn't softened the work. If anything, it made the stakes feel higher. Now, when Ryder looked at Lin Mei across the breakfast table, he saw not just a partner, but someone whose survival depended on decisions he made every day. The weight of that responsibility sat on his shoulders like iron. But Lin Mei carried her own weight without complaint. She learned to read weather and the color of the sky, learned which cattle were prone to wandering, learned how to wrap her hands so the cold didn't crack her skin to bleeding. She moved through the ranch like water finding its course, persistent, necessary, impossible to turn back. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ryder rode into Clemens for supplies. He left Lin Mei at this ranch with the rifle loaded and leaning beside the door, instructions to shoot first and ask questions later if anyone came calling who wasn't him. "I will be fine," she'd said, standing on the porch with her arms crossed against the cold. "I know you will. But humor me anyway." She'd smiled at that, a rare small thing that made something warm bloom in his chest despite the frozen air. The ride to town took 4 hours through snow that came up to the horse's knees. By the time Ryder reached the main street, his face was numb and his hands felt like claws inside his gloves. He tied his horse outside the general store and pushed through the door into blessed warmth. The conversation stopped the moment he entered. 4 men were standing near the potbelly stove. The store owner, 2 ranchers Ryder knew by sight, and Silas Mercer. They all turned to look at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to something harder. Mercer smiled. "Well, if it isn't the newlywed. Congratulations, Hale. Heard you made it official." Ryder ignored him and walked to the counter. "Need 50 pounds of flour, 20 of sugar, coffee, salt, and whatever dried beans you've got." The store owner, a thin man named Garrett with nervous eyes, nodded and started pulling goods from the shelves. "How's the missus settling in?" "Fine." "Must be quite an adjustment for her," one of the ranchers said. His name was Dunbar, and he ran cattle on the north side of the valley, coming from California to a Montana winter. "She's tougher than she looks," Ryder said. "She'd have to be," Mercer cut in, "to survive out there with just you for company. What happens if something goes wrong, if you get hurt, if the cabin catches fire? She doesn't know the land, doesn't know the people. Hell, half the town doesn't even know her name." Ryder turned slowly. "What's your point, Mercer?" "My point is that you've put that woman in a dangerous position." Mercer pushed away from the stove and walked closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Out there alone in the dead of winter with no help for miles. Seems irresponsible, almost cruel. She's not alone. She's with me. And when you're gone?" Mercer spread his hands. "Like right now?" Ryder felt his jaw tighten. "She can handle herself." "Against what? A pack of wolves, a broken leg, a barn fire?" Mercer shook his head. "You're asking her to survive something that would kill most men. And for what? So you can hold on to a piece of land that's not worth the trouble?" "It's worth it to me." "Then you're a fool," Mercer said flatly. "And you're dragging her down with you." The store went quiet. Garrett had stopped packing supplies and was watching the exchange with wide eyes. The other ranchers looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. Ryder stepped closer to Mercer, close enough to see the veins in the older man's neck. "You don't know anything about my wife, and you don't get to tell me what she can handle." "I know she's an outsider," Mercer said, "and I know that makes you vulnerable. The Montana Trust and Development Company is buying up land all through this valley, Hale. They're consolidating, building something bigger than any one rancher can fight. You sell now, you walk away with money in your pocket and your pride intact. You hold on." He leaned in. "Well, winter's long. Accidents happen." Is that a threat? It's a prediction. Ryder held Mercer's gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the counter. Garrett, add a box of rifle ammunition to that order. Mercer laughed. You think bullets will save you? I think they'll make me feel better. Ryder paid for his supplies, loaded them onto his horse, and rode out of town without looking back. But the conversation sat in his gut like bad meat, souring everything. When he got home, Lin Mei was in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. She looked up when he entered, read his face immediately. What happened? Ryder set down the supplies and told her. All of it. Mercer's words, the other men's silence, the feeling that something was tightening around them like a noose. Lin Mei listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set down the brush and walked to the barn door, looking out at the snow-covered valley. He is trying to make you afraid, she said quietly. I know. Is it working? Ryder came to stand beside her. I'm afraid something will happen to you, that I won't be able to stop it. You cannot stop everything, Lin Mei said. No one can. But you can choose whether to live in fear or to live in spite of it. That's easy to say. It is not easy. She turned to face him, and her eyes were fierce. Nothing about this is easy, but I did not travel 2,000 miles to hide. I came here to build something, with you, and I will not let men like Mercer take that away. Ryder felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, exactly, but determination. So what do? We work. We prepare. And we do not give him the satisfaction of seeing us afraid. That night, lying in the darkness with Lin Mei beside him, Ryder made a decision. He would ride the fence lines every day, check for damage, watch for signs of trouble. He would teach Lin Mei to shoot, really shoot, not just hold a rifle, but use it. He would make the ranch as secure as he could, and he would trust that together they were stronger than anything Mercer could throw at them. He was half right. The trouble started small. In early January, Ryder found 3 sections of fence cut on the eastern boundary. No cattle missing this time, just clean cuts in the wire that would let the herd wander if he didn't catch it. He spent a day repairing the damage, riding home in the dark with his hands bleeding through his gloves. 2 weeks later, someone spooked the horses in the middle of the night. Ryder and Lin Mei ran to the corral to find the animals wild-eyed and panicked, but no sign of whoever had done it. They're testing us, Lin Mei said, standing in the snow in her nightdress and boots, hair loose around her shoulders. Seeing how we respond. They want me to ride out looking for a fight, Ryder said. Want me to leave you alone so they can... He stopped. Couldn't finish the thought. Lin Mei touched his arm. I am not afraid of being alone. You should be. Why? Because I am a woman? Because I am Chinese? She shook her head. I have survived worse than men in the dark, Ryder. I will survive this too. But Ryder saw the way she checked the locks on the doors now, saw the way she kept the rifle close when he was working outside, saw the way she watched the tree line like she was waiting for something to emerge. February came with temperatures so cold the breath froze in their lungs. The cattle huddled together for warmth, and Ryder and Lin Mei took turns breaking ice on the water troughs every morning. The work was brutal and endless, but they fell into a rhythm. Him chopping, her hauling, both of them moving like parts of the same machine. One morning, after they'd finished feeding, Lin Mei asked him to teach her to shoot. They set up targets behind the barn, old cans balanced on fence posts. Ryder showed her how to hold the rifle, how to breathe, how to let the shot come as a surprise so the anticipation didn't throw off her aim. Lin Mei was a natural. Her hands were steady, her focus absolute. By the end of the first lesson, she was hitting targets at 30 yards. Where did you learn to concentrate like that? Ryder asked. My mother was a seamstress, Lin Mei said, reloading. She taught me that precision is survival. One bad stitch, one moment of carelessness, and the whole garment fails. She raised the rifle again. The principle is the same. Ryder watched her put 3 more rounds through the center of a can and felt something like pride. That night, they were eating supper when they heard horses outside. Multiple riders, moving fast. Ryder was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Lin Mei stood and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. 4 men, she said. 1 is Mercer. Ryder's blood went cold. He crossed to the door, checked that it was barred, then moved to the window beside Lin Mei. Mercer and 3 hired men sat their horses in the yard, torches held high against the darkness. The firelight made their faces look demonic. "Hail!" Mercer shouted. "I know you're in there. Come on out. Let's talk like civilized men." Ryder didn't move. "I've got a proposition for you," Mercer continued. "Final offer. Montana Trust will pay you $3,000 for this land, cash money, enough to set you and your bride up somewhere warm. California, maybe. Somewhere she'd be more comfortable." "We're not interested," Ryder called through the door. "You haven't heard the full offer yet." "Don't need to." Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then his voice changed, harder, colder. "You're making a mistake, Hale, a serious mistake. This valley's changing. The old ways are done. Men who can't see that get left behind, or worse. Is that another threat?" "It's a certainty." Mercer wheeled his horse around. "You've got 1 week to think it over. After that, the offer expires, and other solutions present themselves." They rode off, torches bobbing in the darkness like malevolent stars. Lin Mei turned from the window. "He will not wait a week." "I know." "So what do we do?" Ryder looked at her, this woman who'd learned to shoot in a single afternoon, who faced down threats without flinching, who stood beside him even when running would be smarter. "We don't wait either," he said. The next morning, Ryder rode to the neighboring ranches. Dunbar's spread to the north, the Carlson place to the west, old Jim Weatherly's property to the south. He asked each of them the same questions. Had Mercer approached them? Had Montana Trust made offers? Had they noticed anything strange? Dunbar admitted Mercer had come calling 6 months ago with an offer he'd refused. "Haven't had trouble since," he said. "But I keep my rifle loaded just the same." The Carlsons had sold 2 months earlier. "Didn't want to," Mrs. Carlson said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "But our barn burned down in November. Lost 20 head of cattle and most of our winter hay. Couldn't afford to rebuild. Montana Trust swooped in with an offer the next day." She paused. "Convenient timing, don't you think?" Jim Weatherly spat tobacco juice into the snow and squinted at Ryder. "Mercer's a snake, always has been, but he's got powerful friends now. That land company's got lawyers, money, connections in the territorial government. They want something, they usually get it." "Not this time," Ryder said. Weatherly laughed without humor. "You got more sand than sense, Hale, but I respect it. You need help, you send word. I'll come." Ryder rode home with the weight of understanding settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his ranch. Mercer and Montana Trust were systematically pushing out small ranchers, buying up land cheap, consolidating power. His marriage to Lin Mei had just made him a more visible target. When he told Lin Mei what he'd learned, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We need evidence." "Evidence of what?" "That the barn fire was arson. That Mercer is behind the threats and the fence cutting." She looked at him steadily. "If we can prove conspiracy, we can take it to the territorial marshal. Make it a legal matter instead of a range war." "That's a long shot." "Everything we have done is a long shot," Lin Mei said. "But we are still here." She was right. They were still here. 3 days later, the barn burned. Ryder woke to Lin Mei shaking his shoulder, her voice urgent in the darkness. "Fire. The barn is on fire." He was up and running before his mind fully registered the words. Outside, orange light painted the snow, and smoke billowed black against the stars. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like clawed hands. The horses were screaming. Ryder ran toward the inferno, but the heat drove him back. Lin Mei appeared beside him with a wet cloth over her face, eyes streaming from the smoke. "The doors are barred from outside," she shouted over the roar of the fire. "Someone locked them in." Rage and terror collided in Ryder's chest. He grabbed an axe from the woodpile and ran to the barn door, swinging with all his strength. The bar splintered. He kicked it free and yanked the door open. Smoke poured out in a choking wall. Inside, he could barely see. Just shapes moving in panic, the horses wild with fear. "Get back!" he yelled to Lin Mei, but she was already beside him, a rope in her hands. Together, they plunged into the burning barn. The heat was incredible. Ryder couldn't breathe, couldn't see, could only move forward by instinct. He found the first horse and threw a rope around its neck, dragged it toward where he thought the door should be. The animal fought him, terrified and disoriented. Lin Mei grabbed the rope and pulled. "Go! I have this one!" Ryder turned back into the inferno, found another horse, another rope. His lungs were screaming for air. The world was narrowing to a tunnel of pain and smoke and desperate motion. He got the second horse out, went back for the third. The roof beam cracked above him with a sound like a gunshot. Ryder looked up and saw fire eating through the wood, saw the whole structure starting to collapse. "Ryder?" Lin Mei's voice, hoarse and desperate. "Get out!" He found the last horse and dragged it toward the light. The beam gave way with a roar. Ryder threw himself forward, and the horse bolted past him, just as half the roof came down in a shower of sparks and burning wood. Lin Mei grabbed him and pulled him clear. They collapsed in the snow 20 feet from the barn, watching it burn. All 6 horses were safe. The barn was gone. Ryder lay there coughing smoke, lungs raw, hands blistered. Lin Mei was beside him, face black with soot, hair singed, breathing in great ragged gasps. "You could have died," she said when she could speak. "So could you." "I will not let them burn us out." Her voice was fierce despite the smoke damage. "I will not." Ryder pulled her close, both of them shaking, and watched 12 years of work burn to ash in memory. When dawn came gray and cold, they walked through the wreckage. The barn was a skeleton of blackened timbers. The hay was gone. The tack, the tools, the winter feed, all of it reduced to smoke and ruin. But the horses were alive, and so were they. Lin Mei found it in the snow near the barn's eastern corner, a torch, hastily dropped, still smelling of kerosene. She picked it up with a piece of cloth and brought it to Ryder. "Evidence," she said. Ryder looked at the torch, then at the ruins of his barn, then at his wife standing in the ash-stained snow with her chin raised and her eyes burning brighter than any fire. "We take this to the marshal," he said. "When?" "Today." They left the horses in the corral and rode double on Ryder's gelding, the torch wrapped and tied to the saddle. The ride to Clemens took 6 hours, and by the time they arrived, Ryder's whole body ached from smoke inhalation and burns he hadn't noticed in the chaos. The marshal's office was a small building next to the jail. Ryder pushed open the door to find Marshal Tom Brennan sitting behind a desk covered in paperwork. Brennan was in his 50s, gray-haired and solid. A man who'd kept the peace in Clemens for 20 years through fairness and an absolute refusal to be intimidated. He looked up when they entered, and his eyes widened slightly at their appearance, soot-stained, burned, exhausted. "Hale, Mrs. Hale." He stood. "What happened?" Ryder set the torch on the desk. "Our barn burned last night. Someone barred the doors from the outside, locked our horses in to die. We found this nearby." Brennan picked up the torch, examined it, smelled it. His face hardened. "Arson." "Yes." "You know who did it?" "I know who ordered it," Ryder said. "Silas Mercer." Brennan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." Ryder leaned forward. "Mercer's been pressuring me to sell for months. He works for Montana Trust and Development. They're buying up ranches all through the valley. The Carlsons' barn burned in November. They sold right after. Now mine burns, and I'm supposed to believe it's coincidence? Coincidence happens. Not like this." Lin Mei spoke for the first time, her voice still rough from smoke. "Marshal, we have been threatened repeatedly. Our fences cut, our cattle stolen, our horses spooked in the night, and now our barn is destroyed. This is not random misfortune. This is systematic intimidation designed to force us off our land." Brennan looked at her with something like respect. "You have proof Mercer was involved?" "The pattern is proof," Lin Mei said. "The Carlsons' barn burns, they sell. Ours burns, and Mercer visited 3 days ago with a final offer and a threat. The sequence is not subtle." "Pattern isn't proof in a court of law, ma'am." "Then what is?" Lin Mei's voice rose slightly. "How many barns must burn? How many families must be driven out before you act?" Brennan was quiet for a moment, then he sighed. "I'll open an investigation. Talk to Mercer. Talk to the Carlsons. Look into Montana Trust's activities in the valley. But I need you to understand something. These land companies have lawyers, money, and friends in high places. If I'm going to bring charges, I need evidence that'll stand up in territorial court. Right now, I don't have that." "So we wait for them to try again?" Ryder asked. "You stay vigilant. You document everything, and you let me do my job." Brennan looked at them both. "I know Silas Mercer. He's ambitious, ruthless, and smart enough not to leave tracks. If he's behind this, I'll find out. But it's going to take time. Time was something they didn't have. They left the marshal's office and walked to the general store for supplies. Garrett took one look at them, and his face went pale. "What happened to you two?" "Barn fire," Ryder said shortly. Word spread through town like the fire had spread through dry wood. By the time they left the store, a small crowd had gathered outside. People Ryder knew by sight, neighbors he'd traded with, men and women who'd lived in this valley as long as he had. Mrs. Carlson pushed through the crowd, her face tight with emotion. "Was it like ours? Barred doors?" Ryder nodded. She turned to the crowd. "That's 3 barns in 6 months. The Hendersons in September, ours in November, now the Hales. And every time Mercer or someone from Montana Trust shows up within days with an offer." "Coincidence," someone muttered. "It's not coincidence," Mrs. Carlson's voice cracked. "It's theft. It's violence dressed up as business. And if we don't stand together, we'll all lose everything." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some faces showed agreement, others showed fear. Then Silas Mercer rode up on his big roan, 3 hired men behind him. The crowd parted to let him through. Mercer looked down at Ryder with an expression of practiced concern. "Heard about your barn, Hale. Terrible tragedy. This time of year fires can start from anything. A lantern, a spark from the stove." "It wasn't an accident," Ryder said. "You have proof of that?" "I have a torch soaked in kerosene." Mercer's face didn't change. Could have been dropped by anyone. A passing drifter, maybe. "These are dangerous times." He paused. "Which is why I'm renewing my offer. $3,000 cash. Get you out of this valley before something worse happens." "You mean before you do something worse," Lin Mei said. Mercer looked at her like she was an insect that had spoken. "Careful, Mrs. Hale. Slander is a serious charge." "So is arson," she said calmly, "and we have reported it to the marshal." "Tom Brennan's a good man," Mercer said. "I'm sure he'll conduct a thorough investigation. In the meantime," he looked back at Ryder, "my offer stands. 1 week. After that, you're on your own." He rode away, and the crowd dispersed slowly, people avoiding Ryder's eyes. Only Jim Weatherly came forward. "You need a place to keep those horses. You bring them to my spread. I got room." "I appreciate that, Jim." "And Hale?" The old rancher's voice was quiet. "You're doing the right thing, standing up. Most folks are too scared. But you keep fighting, and I'll back you." It wasn't much, but it was something. They rode home in silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow red and gold. The burned barn was a black scar on the white landscape, visible from a mile away. Lin Mei looked at it and said, "We rebuild." "With what money? What materials?" "With whatever we have." She looked at him. "They want us to give up, to run, so we do the opposite. We rebuild. We show them that we cannot be burned out." Ryder wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was impossible, that they didn't have the resources, that winter was only half over and they were already barely surviving. But when he looked at her face, soot-stained, determined, absolutely unbroken, he couldn't say it. "All right," he said, "we rebuild." That night, they slept in the cabin with the rifle loaded and the door barred. Outside, the wind howled through the burned skeleton of the barn, and somewhere in the darkness, Ryder knew Silas Mercer was planning his next move. But for the first time since the fire, Ryder felt something other than fear. He felt ready. The rebuilding started the next morning with salvage. Ryder and Lin Mei worked through the blackened remains of the barn, pulling out anything that could be saved. Twisted nails they could straighten, half-burned boards that still had good wood, metal hinges and brackets that had survived the fire. The work was grim and dirty, their hands turning black with soot, but neither of them complained. Jim Weatherly arrived at noon with his son and a wagon full of lumber. "Heard you might need this," he said, climbing down stiffly. "Cut it last summer. Been seasoning in my shed." Ryder stared at the wood, enough to frame a small structure, maybe rebuild one wall. "Jim, I can't afford—" "Didn't ask you to pay," Weatherly said. "Asked you to accept help. There's a difference." Lin Mei came forward, wiping soot from her face. "Thank you, Mr. Weatherly. This is very kind." "Kindness got nothing to do with it, ma'am. It's about what's right." He looked at Ryder. Mercer thinks he can burn people out and face no consequences. Time somebody showed him different. They worked together through the afternoon, clearing debris and laying out where the new barn would stand. It wouldn't be as large as the old one. They didn't have materials for that, but it would be enough to shelter the horses and store what little hay they had left. By the time Weatherly and his son left at dusk, the foundation was cleared and the first posts were set. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. That night, Lin Mei sat at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil, making lists. Ryder watched her work, saw the concentration in her face, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking hard. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Accounting," she said without looking up. "We lost the barn, most of the hay, and several tools. We have 6 horses that need feeding, 23 cattle, and 4 months of winter left. Our supplies will last 6 weeks if we are careful. The lumber Jim brought will build a shelter, but not a proper barn. We need more wood, more nails, and more hands. We can't afford to hire help." "I'm not talking about hiring," Lin Mei said. She looked up, and her eyes were sharp with thinking. "I'm talking about trading. You know ranching. I know accounts and trade. Together we find what people need and offer what we have." "We don't have anything to offer." "We have knowledge," Lin Mei said. "You know cattle, horses, land management. I know how to organize, how to keep records, how to make supplies stretch. The Carlsons sold their ranch, but they are still in the valley, yes? And the Hendersons?" Ryder nodded slowly. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned they're living in town now, working odd jobs." "Then they need help too," Lin Mei said, "and perhaps others. If we can organize the small ranchers, share resources and knowledge, we become stronger together than Mercer expects." Ryder looked at her. This woman who'd been in Montana less than 3 months and was already thinking like someone who'd lived here all her life. "You want to start a ranchers' cooperative?" "I want to stop fighting alone," Lin Mei said. "Mercer has Montana Trust, lawyers, hired men. We have each other. But if we gather more, if we show others they do not have to face this alone, then maybe we have a chance." It was dangerous. It was ambitious. It was exactly the kind of thing that would make Mercer escalate. It was also brilliant. "All right," Ryder said. "Let's try." They started with the Carlsons. Ryder and Lin Mei rode into Clemens 2 days later and found them living in a room above the livery stable. Mr. Carlson looked 10 years older than he had in November, his face hollow with shame and defeat. "We sold," he said when Ryder asked if they'd join a cooperative effort. "We're out." "What do you want from us?" "Your knowledge," Lin Mei said. "You ranched for 15 years. You know the land, the weather patterns, the best grazing areas. That knowledge is valuable." "Not valuable enough to keep our home," Mrs. Carlson said bitterly. "But valuable enough to help others keep theirs," Lin Mei said, "and to build a record. You said your barn burned under suspicious circumstances. If you will tell that story officially, put it in writing, it becomes evidence, not just coincidence." The Carlsons looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. "Mercer has powerful friends," Mr. Carlson said finally. "We speak up. We make enemies." "You already have enemies," Ryder said. "They just haven't finished with you yet. Montana Trust will come for your testimony eventually. Make sure you stay quiet, or they'll offer you money to say the fire was an accident. Either way, you lose unless you act first." Mrs. Carlson stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "We should have fought. When the barn burned, when Mercer came with his offer, we should have fought. But we were tired and scared, and it seemed easier to just take the money and leave." "It's not too late," Lin Mei said. Mrs. Carlson turned. "What do you need?" "Your story. In writing, signed and dated. Everything you remember. When the fire started, what you found, who came to make an offer, and when." "And then what?" "Then we find others," Lin Mei said. "The Hendersons. Anyone else Montana Trust has approached. We build a pattern so clear that even territorial judges cannot ignore it." The Carlsons agreed. Mrs. Carlson sat down at their small table and wrote for an hour, her handwriting precise and angry. When she finished, she had 3 pages detailing the night of the fire, the barred barn doors, and Mercer's visit the next morning with an offer exactly 1/3 what their property was worth. He said the offer was generous, she wrote in the final paragraph. Said we were lucky he was willing to buy damaged property. Said if we didn't take it, the winter would finish what the fire started. We took it. I have regretted it every day since. Ryder and Lin Mei left with the document carefully folded in Lin Mei's satchel. On the ride home, neither spoke for a long time. Then Lin Mei said, "They will find their courage again. Sometimes it just takes seeing someone else fight first." "I hope you're right." "I am always right," Lin Mei said with a small smile. "You have just been too stubborn to notice." Despite everything, Ryder laughed. They found the Hendersons living on the southern edge of town in a house so small it barely qualified as a cabin. Mr. Henderson worked at the sawmill now, his hands scarred from lumber and machinery. His wife took in washing. "We heard about your barn," Mrs. Henderson said when they arrived. She was a round woman with kind eyes and the perpetual exhaustion of someone working 3 jobs to survive. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Ryder said. "Help us stop it from happening to anyone else." Mr. Henderson's face darkened. "You think you can stop Montana Trust? They're bigger than all of us combined." "Maybe," Lin Mei said, "but they are not bigger than the law. And if we can prove they are using arson and intimidation to acquire land illegally, the territorial courts will have to act." "That's a big if," Henderson said. "It is also our only option," Lin Mei said, "unless you prefer to let them take everything while we watch." Henderson looked at his wife. She nodded slowly. "Our barn burned in September," he said. "Doors were barred from outside, same as yours. We lost 8 horses and most of our equipment. Montana Trust rep showed up 2 days later. Mercer accompanied him. They offered $1,200 for property worth $4,000 at least." "Will you put that in writing?" Ryder asked. Henderson hesitated. "If word gets back to Mercer that we're talking, he already knows we are fighting back," Lin Mei said. "The question is whether you will fight with us or let him win by doing nothing." Something shifted in Henderson's face, shame giving way to anger, anger giving way to determination. "All right, I'll write it, but I want one thing in return." "What?" Ryder asked. "When this is over, if we win, I want Montana Trust to pay for what they took from us. Our ranch, our animals, our livelihood. They owe us, and I want that debt collected." "If we win," Ryder said, "I'll make sure every rancher they've cheated gets restitution. You have my word." Henderson nodded and went to find paper. By the end of February, they had 7 written testimonies from families Montana Trust had pressured or burned out. Each account followed the same pattern: suspicious fire, barred doors or cut fences, immediate offer from Mercer or a Montana Trust representative, price far below market value, implicit or explicit threats about what would happen if they refused. Lin Mei organized everything into a folder with tabs and dates, cross-referencing incidents with land transfers recorded at the county office. She worked late into the night, squinting by lamplight, building a case that even Ryder had to admit looked damning. "You should have been a lawyer," he told her one evening, watching her add another notation to her growing chart. "In China, women cannot be lawyers," Lin Mei said. "In America, they can in some places, but not here. So I do the work anyway, and let men take credit." She looked up. "Does that bother you? That you're smarter than most men I know?" "No." Ryder leaned back. "That the world won't recognize it? Yeah, that bothers me." Lin Mei's expression softened. "Then help me change it. Not with words, with action." The next morning, they took everything to Marshal Brennan. He spent 2 hours reading through the documents, his face growing progressively harder. When he finished, he looked up at them with something like respect. "This is good work," he said. "Detailed, organized, and damning if it's all accurate." "It is accurate," Lin Mei said. "Every account is signed and dated. Every property transfer can be verified through county records." Brennan tapped the folder. "The problem is proving Montana Trust knew about the fires. Mercer can claim he was simply offering to buy property from desperate sellers. Without direct evidence linking him to the arson, this is circumstantial at best." 7 families, Ryder said. 7 fires, 7 offers within days. That's not circumstantial. That's a pattern. In a criminal trial, maybe. But Montana Trust will hire lawyers who'll tear this apart. They'll find alternative explanations, question the witnesses' credibility, drag it out until everyone's exhausted and broke. Brennan leaned forward. "I believe you. I think Mercer's guilty as hell. But belief isn't enough. I need something concrete. A witness who saw him set a fire, a document ordering the arson, something that directly connects him to the crime. We're working on it, Lin Mei said. Work faster, Brennan said. Because if Mercer finds out you're building a case, he'll escalate. And next time, it might not be a barn that burns. They rode home in grim silence. The new barn was finished now, a smaller, rougher version of what they'd lost, but functional. Jim Weatherly and 3 other ranchers had helped with the final construction, and standing in the valley with the mountains behind it, the building looked almost defiant. "We need someone inside," Lin Mei said as they unsaddled the horses. Inside what? Montana Trust, or Mercer's operation. Someone who knows what they are planning, who gives the orders, where the money comes from. She looked at Ryder. The testimonies prove pattern, but to prove conspiracy, we need internal knowledge. Nobody who works for Mercer is going to turn on him. Perhaps not willingly, Lin Mei said, but people have reasons to betray loyalty, fear, money, conscience. We find someone with one of those reasons, and we offer them something better. Ryder thought about it. Mercer employed at least a dozen men, ranch hands, hired guns, men who asked no questions and took orders for pay. Most were loyal because loyalty was profitable. But men like that had no permanent allegiance. They worked for whoever paid most or threatened least. "There's a man named Colfax," Ryder said slowly. "Works for Mercer, but I've heard he's not happy about it. Got into some debt gambling, and Mercer bought the debt. Now Colfax works it off doing whatever Mercer tells him." "Where does he drink?" Lin Mei asked. "Why?" "Because men talk when they drink, and if Colfax is already resentful, perhaps he can be persuaded to talk to the right people." 2 nights later, Ryder found Colfax in the Clemens saloon, sitting alone at the bar with a whiskey that was mostly gone. Colfax was in his 30s, thin and weathered, with eyes that had seen too much and regretted most of it. Ryder sat down beside him and ordered 2 whiskeys. "Heard you work for Mercer." Colfax glanced at him, recognized him, tensed. "You're Hale." "I am." "Then you should know better than to talk to me." "Maybe, but I'm going to anyway." Ryder pushed one of the whiskeys toward Colfax. "How much does Mercer own you for?" Colfax's jaw tightened. "That's my business." "It is until it becomes mine," Ryder said. "I need information, Colfax, and I'm willing to pay for it. I don't know anything." "You work for Mercer. You know plenty." Ryder kept his voice low. "I'm not asking you to testify. I'm not asking you to make yourself a target. I'm just asking what you know about Montana Trust's operations in this valley. Who gives orders? How they decide which properties to target." Colfax drank his whiskey in one swallow. "And what do I get?" "Your debt paid off, cash money, and a job on my ranch if you want it." "I can't afford to betray Mercer." "You can't afford not to," Ryder said. "This valley's changing, Colfax. Montana Trust is consolidating power, and when they're done, they won't need hired men anymore. They'll need managers, bookkeepers, people who make them look legitimate. Men like you? You're disposable. The question is whether you figure that out before or after Mercer throws you away." Colfax stared at his empty glass for a long time. Finally, he said, "I want $500 and passage out of Montana." "Done. And I want it in writing, signed, notarized." "You'll have it tomorrow." Colfax looked around the saloon, making sure no one was listening. Then he leaned closer. Montana Trust doesn't just buy land. They engineer situations that force sales. Fires are the easiest, quick, devastating, hard to prove. But they've also used cattle theft, water rights manipulation, and legal harassment. There's a lawyer in Helena who files spurious claims against small ranchers, buries them in court costs until they give up. "Who orders it?" Ryder asked. "Mercer takes direction from a man named Halstead. Works for Montana Trust out of Denver. Halstead sets targets, Mercer executes. The ranchers they've hit so far were chosen because they had good water access or sat on land the railroad wants." Ryder's blood went cold. "The railroad's involved?" "Not officially. But Montana Trust is buying land for future rail expansion. They're betting the Northern Pacific will push through this valley within 5 years. The ranchers they're clearing out now? That's going to be a town, a depot, maybe a meat processing center. Property worth 10 times what they're paying." It was worse than Ryder had imagined. This wasn't just one corrupt rancher intimidating neighbors. This was large-scale land speculation backed by corporate money and territorial ambition. "I need you to put this in writing," Ryder said. "I give you that, I'm a dead man. You give me that, you're a free man, and Mercer goes to prison." Ryder met Colfax's eyes. "Your choice. Stay bound to a man who'll discard you the moment you're inconvenient, or help bring him down and walk away clean." Colfax was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "I'll write it, but I want the money first. Half now, half when you deliver the document. Deal." They shook hands in the dim saloon, and Ryder knew he'd just made an arrangement that would either save them or destroy them. He rode home and told Lin Mei everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more focused with each detail. "This is what we needed," she said when he finished. "Inside knowledge, proof of conspiracy. If Colfax provides documentation, we can take this beyond the local marshal. This becomes a territorial matter, maybe even federal if the railroad's involved. If Colfax doesn't get cold feet," Ryder said, "or if Mercer doesn't find out first, then we move quickly." Lin Mei stood and pulled out her folder of testimonies. "I will prepare a comprehensive report. The testimonies, the land transfer records, Colfax statement when we get it. Everything organized so clearly that any judge who reads it will see the pattern. And then what? Then we take it to Helena, to the territorial attorney. Make this official." Ryder looked at her, this woman who'd survived everything the frontier had thrown at her and responded by fighting back harder. "You know this is dangerous. Mercer finds out we're going to Helena. He'll try to stop us." "Then we do not tell him," Lin Mei said simply. "We prepare in secret, we move fast, and we trust that justice, when finally confronted with evidence it cannot ignore, will prevail." Ryder wished he had her faith, but he'd seen too much to believe in justice without force behind it. 3 days later, Colfax delivered. He met Ryder at dawn on the edge of town, handed over 6 pages of detailed documentation, and took his money without a word. The pages outlined Montana Trust's operations in brutal detail: properties targeted, methods used, profits anticipated, names of everyone involved from Halstead in Denver to the lawyer in Helena who filed fraudulent claims. It was enough to bury them all. Lin Mei spent a week organizing everything into a comprehensive case file. She worked with an intensity Ryder had never seen, barely sleeping, eating only when he forced her to. The final document was 32 pages, indexed and cross-referenced, with supporting testimony and documentation. "This is good enough to convict," Ryder said, reading through it. "Good enough is not sufficient," Lin Mei said. "It must be undeniable. It must be so clear that no lawyer, no judge, no corrupt official can dismiss it or explain it away." She was right. This was their one chance. If they went to Helena and failed, Mercer would know they were coming for him, and he'd strike before they could try again. On March 15th, with spring just beginning to touch the valley, Ryder and Lin Mei prepared to ride to Helena. They told no one except Jim Weatherly, who agreed to watch the ranch and feed the animals. "You sure about this?" Weatherly asked the night before they left. "No," Ryder said honestly, "but we're doing it anyway." "Then ride careful, and watch your backs. Mercer's got eyes everywhere." They left at dawn with the case file hidden in a waterproof satchel, riding hard for Helena. The journey would take 3 days if the weather held. Ryder kept his rifle loaded and his eyes on the horizon, half expecting pursuit. It came on the second day. They just crossed a creek swollen with snowmelt when Ryder heard horses behind them. He turned and saw 4 riders coming fast, Mercer in the lead. "Ride!" Ryder shouted to Lin Mei. They spurred their horses forward, but Mercer's men were on fresh mounts and gaining. The valley narrowed ahead, rising into foothills that would give them cover if they could reach them. Lin Mei's horse stumbled on loose rock. She stayed in the saddle but lost precious seconds. Ryder circled back, putting himself between her and pursuit. Mercer reined up 50 yards away, his men flanking him. He had a rifle across his saddle, but he didn't raise it. "Going somewhere, Hale?" he called. "None of your business. It's my business when you're carrying documents that concern me." Mercer walked his horse forward slowly. "Colfax talked, didn't he? Told you all about Montana Trust, about Halstead, about the railroad plans?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult me," Mercer's voice went hard. "I know you've been gathering testimonies, talking to the families we bought out, building a case. And I know you're headed to Helena to take it to the territorial attorney. How, you think I don't have sources? I know everything that happens in this valley. Mercer stopped his horse 20 feet away. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me those documents, all of them. And then you're going to ride back to your ranch and forget this happened. And if I don't? Mercer smiled without warmth. Then I stop being subtle. Your barn burned by accident. Your fence got cut by drifters. Your cattle wandered off on their own. I've been careful, Hale. Careful to leave no proof. But if you force my hand, I'll stop being careful and start being direct. Your wife's an easy target. Think about that before you make this a war you can't win. Ryder felt rage rise like bile. He started to reach for his rifle, but Lin Mei's voice stopped him. We have copies, she said calmly. Mercer turned to her. What? Copies of everything. Testimonies, land records, Colfax's statement. They are already in Helena, in the hands of people who will release them if anything happens to us. Lin Mei's voice was steady as stone. So if you kill us, the evidence still reaches the territorial attorney. The only difference is that murder charges are added to arson and conspiracy. It was a bluff. They had no copies in Helena, but Lin Mei said it with such absolute conviction that even Ryder almost believed her. Mercer's face went carefully blank. You're lying. Perhaps, or perhaps I am simply better at planning than you anticipated. Lin Mei urged her horse forward until she was level with Ryder. We are leaving now. You can try to stop us, which accomplishes nothing, because the evidence will surface regardless. Or you can let us go and prepare your defense, which at least gives you time to hire expensive lawyers. Mercer stared at her with something like grudging respect. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You've got sand, Mrs. Hale. I'll give you that. But sand doesn't stop bullets. Neither does arrogance stop justice, Lin Mei said. We are done talking. Move aside. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Ryder's hand stayed on his rifle. Mercer's men watched their boss, waiting for orders. Then Mercer yanked his horse aside. Go ahead. Ride to Helena. File your complaint. It won't matter. Montana Trust has judges, lawyers, connections you can't imagine. You're fighting a machine, Hale, and machines don't care how brave you are. We will see, Lin Mei said. They rode past Mercer and his men, backs exposed, hearts pounding. Ryder expected a bullet with every breath, but it didn't come. They reached the foothills and kept riding, not stopping until Mercer was long out of sight. Only then did Lin Mei start shaking. We don't have copies, Ryder said. I know. If he'd called that bluff, he did not. Lin Mei's voice was unsteady but fierce. Because men like Mercer always assume their enemies are as thorough as they are. He believed me because he would have made copies himself. Ryder pulled his horse close to hers and gripped her hand. You could have gotten us killed. We were already dead if we gave him those documents, Lin Mei said. So I gave us a chance instead. She looked at him. Was I wrong? No, Ryder said. You were perfect. They rode on toward Helena, carrying the evidence that would either destroy Silas Mercer or get them both killed trying. Helena rose from the valley floor like a promise carved in stone and ambition. The territorial capital sprawled across the hillsides, buildings packed tight with the energy of gold money and political power. Ryder and Lin Mei rode in at dusk on the third day, exhausted and wary, the case files still secure in Lin Mei's satchel. They found lodging at a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who asked no questions when she saw the dust on their clothes and the wariness in their eyes. After washing and changing into the cleanest clothes they had, they sat in their small room and planned their approach. The territorial attorney's office opens at 8, Lin Mei said, studying a map of Helena she'd purchased from a street vendor. We arrive early, before the building fills with people. We present the case directly to the attorney himself, not a clerk who can dismiss us or delay. And if he won't see us? Then we make noise until he has no choice, Lin Mei said. We go to the newspaper. We find a judge who will listen. We do not leave this city until someone with power agrees to act. Ryder looked at her in the lamplight, saw the determination carved into every line of her face. 3 months ago, she'd stepped off a stagecoach into a life she hadn't chosen. and now she was planning to challenge one of the most powerful land companies in the territory. The transformation was staggering. "You're not afraid?" he asked. "I am terrified," Lin Mei said simply. "But fear is not the same as stopping. My mother taught me that. She was afraid every day we lived in Guangdong during the famine, but she did not stop working, did not stop fighting to keep us alive. Fear is just weather. You work through it." They slept fitfully that night, taking turns keeping watch by the window. At dawn, they dressed in their best clothes. Ryder in a suit he'd bought years ago and rarely wore. Lin Mei in a dark blue dress that made her look simultaneously formidable and respectable. She pinned her hair up carefully and checked the satchel 3 times before they left. The territorial attorney's office was in a brick building near the capital, impressive and intimidating. They climbed the steps at 7:30 and found the doors already open, clerks arriving with coffee and newspapers. A young man at the front desk looked up as they approached. "We need to see Territorial Attorney Jameson," Ryder said. The clerk barely glanced at them. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Mr. Jameson doesn't see anyone without an appointment. You can schedule one for next month if you'd like." "This can't wait a month," Lin Mei said. "We have evidence of criminal conspiracy involving land fraud, arson, and corporate corruption. It requires immediate attention." The clerk's expression shifted from bored to mildly interested. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that needs to be presented to Mr. Jameson directly," Lin Mei said, "not filtered through intermediaries who may have conflicts of interest." The young man stiffened. "I assure you, ma'am, this office maintains the highest standards of impartiality." "Then prove it," Lin Mei said calmly. "Tell Mr. Jameson that we have documentation implicating Montana Trust and development in systematic criminal activity across the Clemens Valley. Tell him we have testimony from 7 families and internal documentation from a company employee. And tell him that if he refuses to see us, we will take this information directly to the Helena Independent and let them decide if the Territorial Attorney's Office is complicit in covering up corporate crime." The clerk's face went pale. "You're threatening." "I am explaining options," Lin Mei said. "Mr. Jameson can see us now and review the evidence privately, or he can read about it in tomorrow's newspaper and explain to voters why his office ignored credible allegations of arson and fraud. His choice." The clerk stood abruptly. "Wait here." He disappeared through a door behind the desk. Ryder leaned close to Lin Mei and whispered, "You're either brilliant or you just made this impossible." "Sometimes they are the same thing," she whispered back. 5 minutes later, the clerk returned with a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit. Territorial Attorney Marcus Jameson had the weathered face of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms and the shrewd eyes of someone who'd survived Montana politics. He looked them over with the quick assessment of a man used to judging character at a glance. "I'm Jameson," he said. "You're the couple with evidence against Montana Trust?" "We are," Ryder said. "I'm Ryder Hale. This is my wife, Lin Mei. We ranch in the Clemens Valley." Jameson's eyes lingered on Lin Mei for a moment, taking in her Chinese features, her careful dress, her direct gaze, then returned to Ryder. "Come with me." They followed him into a private office lined with law books and file cabinets. Jameson closed the door and gestured to chairs facing his desk. "You've got 10 minutes to convince me this isn't a waste of my time," he said, sitting down. "Go." Lin Mei opened the satchel and pulled out the organized case file. She placed it on the desk with both hands, a deliberate presentation. This file contains testimony from 7 families whose properties were destroyed or damaged under suspicious circumstances between September and February. In each case, Montana Trust and Development made purchase offers within days of the damage. In each case, the offers were significantly below market value. In each case, the families were pressured to sell quickly or face additional hardship. Jameson opened the file and started reading. His expression remained neutral, but Ryder saw his eyes moving faster as he absorbed the information. This also contains land transfer records showing Montana Trust has acquired 19 properties in the Clemens Valley over the past 18 months. Lin Mei continued. Most purchases occurred immediately following property damage. The pattern is statistically improbable without coordination. "Improbable isn't illegal," Jameson said without looking up. "The testimony from Thomas Colfax is," Lin Mei said, "page 22. Jameson flipped to the page and read. Ryder watched his face shift from skepticism to sharp interest. Colfax's statement detailed Montana Trust's methods, how Halstead in Denver selected properties, how Mercer executed intimidation and sabotage, how a lawyer in Helena filed spurious claims to harass small ranchers into selling. Colfax claims he participated in barn burnings, Jameson said slowly. That's arson, a hanging offense. He's willing to testify in exchange for immunity, Ryder said. He wants out of Montana and protection from retaliation. And you trust him? We trust that self-interest is a reliable motivator, Lin Mei said. Colfax fears Mercer, but he fears prison more. He will testify if you guarantee his safety. Jameson read for another 5 minutes in silence. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave. This is serious. If even half of this is accurate, Montana Trust has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as legitimate business. But proving it in court will be difficult. Halstead is in Denver, outside my jurisdiction. Mercer will deny everything. And Montana Trust has lawyers who will tie this up in motions and delays for years. So you do nothing? Lin Mei asked quietly. I didn't say that. Jameson closed the file. I said it will be difficult, not impossible. But I need to verify this information, interview witnesses myself, and build a case that can survive Montana Trust's legal assault. That takes time. How much time? Ryder asked. 3 months, maybe 4. We don't have 4 months, Ryder said. Mercer knows we're here. He knows we're coming for him. The moment we leave this office, he'll escalate. More fires, more intimidation, maybe worse. Then I'll issue a restraining order. Paper won't stop him, Ryder said flatly. You know that as well as I do. Jameson leaned back in his chair, studying them both. What do you want from me? Arrest Silas Mercer, Lin Mei said. Today. Charge him with conspiracy to commit arson and fraud. Hold him while you build the full case. Without Mercer directing operations, Montana Trust's activities in our valley will stop long enough for us to survive. I can't arrest a man based solely on uncorroborated testimony from a witness with a criminal history, Jameson said. I need probable cause that'll hold up when a judge reviews it. You have 7 families' testimony, all circumstantial, good for establishing pattern, not sufficient for arrest. Jameson tapped the file. What I need is direct evidence. Witnesses who saw Mercer order the fires, documents in his handwriting, financial records showing Montana Trust payments for illegal activity. Something concrete. Lin Mei and Ryder exchanged glances. They'd gathered everything they could, but Jameson was right. It was all indirect, compelling, but not conclusive. There is one more thing, Lin Mei said slowly. The land survey records. Jameson raised an eyebrow. What about them? When Montana Trust purchases properties, they conduct surveys to establish boundaries and assess value. Those surveys are filed with the county office. But according to Mr. Henderson's testimony, his property was surveyed twice, once accurately and once with deliberately falsified boundaries that showed his land extending onto public grazing territory, making his deed invalid. That's fraud, Jameson said, leaning forward. Yes, and if Montana Trust used false surveys to coerce sales from other families, those surveys will be on file, signed by licensed surveyors who can be subpoenaed and questioned under oath. Jameson stood abruptly and walked to a map of Montana territory hanging on his wall. He studied it for a long moment, then turned back to them. The county surveyor's office in Clemens, do they keep duplicates of all land surveys? They should, Ryder said. County law requires it. Then here's what we do, Jameson said. You return to Clemens. You obtain copies of every land survey Montana Trust has filed in the past 2 years. You bring those copies here, and I'll have my staff compare them against the original property deeds. If we find systematic falsification, that's documentary evidence of fraud. Combined with the testimony you've already provided, it becomes grounds for arrest. That could take weeks, Ryder said. The county office only opens 3 days a week, and the surveyor is notoriously slow. Then be persuasive, Jameson said. This is your case, Mr. Hale. I can prosecute it, but I can't build it for you. You want Mercer arrested? Get me evidence a judge can't dismiss. Lin Mei stood, gathering the case file. How long do we have? Montana Trust lawyers are already good. If they get wind of an investigation, they'll bury evidence and intimidate witnesses faster than we can stop them. Jameson walked to the door and opened it. I'll start preliminary inquiries quietly. But you've got 2 weeks to get me those surveys. After that, if Mercer hasn't been arrested, he'll know something's coming and this whole case collapses. They left the territorial attorney's office with a fragile sense of progress. 2 weeks. 14 days to obtain documents from an office that would absolutely report to Mercer the moment they started asking questions. "We need help," Lin Mei said as they walked back toward the boarding house. "Someone in Clemens who can access those records without raising suspicion." "The county clerk is Mercer's cousin," Ryder said. "Anyone who works in that office will report to him immediately." "Then we do not go through official channels," Lin Mei said. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "We go at night. We copy the records ourselves." Ryder stared at her. "You're talking about breaking into a county office." "I am talking about obtaining public records that we have every legal right to review but cannot access safely through normal means." Lin Mei's voice was calm, but her eyes were fierce. "Jameson needs those surveys. The county clerk will not provide them willingly. So we take them. If we're caught, then we are no worse off than we already are," Lin Mei said. "Mercer is going to come for us regardless. At least this way, we have a chance of stopping him first." Ryder thought about all the rules he'd followed his whole life, all the times he'd done things the right way, the legal way, the way that was supposed to matter, and how little any of it had protected him or the people he loved. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." They spent the next day preparing. Ryder purchased lockpicks from a disreputable pawn shop on the edge of town, claiming he'd lost the key to his trunk. Lin Mei bought candles, paper, and pencils for copying documents. They studied a map of Clemens, identifying the county office location and planning their approach. That evening, they began the long ride back. They pushed hard, changing horses twice at way stations, sleeping only a few hours each night. By the time they reached the valley, they'd been traveling for 60 hours and looked like ghosts. Jim Weatherly met them at the ranch with relief written across his weathered face. "Thank the stars you're back. Thought maybe Mercer caught up to you." "He tried," Ryder said, dismounting stiffly. "We got past him." "And the territorial attorney?" "He'll act if we can get him more evidence," Lin Mei said, "which means we need to access the county surveyor's records." Weatherly's expression darkened. "That office is locked tighter than a drum, and the clerk reports everything to Mercer." "We know," Ryder said. "That's why we're going in after hours." "You mean breaking in?" "I mean obtaining public documents through unconventional means," Lin Mei said. "Will you help?" Weatherly was quiet for a long moment, jaw working like he was chewing something tough. Finally, he spat and said, "What do you need?" They planned it for 3 nights later, giving them time to scout the office and wait for a moonless night. The county office was a small building on Clemens Main Street, sandwiched between the bank and a dry goods store. It had 2 entrances, front and back, and barred windows. "The back door has a weak lock," Weatherly reported after his scouting mission. "I could probably jimmy it with a pry bar, but it'll make noise." "The front has a better lock but more exposure," Ryder said. "Anyone walking past will see us." "Then we create a distraction," Lin Mei said. She looked at Weatherly. "Can you arrange a small fire? Something that draws attention to the other end of town but does no real damage?" "You want me to commit arson while you commit breaking and entering?" Weatherly laughed without humor. "We've come a long way from ranching, haven't we?" "We do what survival requires," Lin Mei said quietly, "and we trust that when this is over, the law will recognize why we had no choice." On the chosen night, they moved into position at midnight. Weatherly set a controlled fire in a trash heap behind the saloon, enough smoke to draw people out but contained enough not to spread. Within minutes, half the town was rushing toward the commotion. Ryder and Lin Mei approached the county office from the rear. Ryder worked the lock with picks while Lin Mei kept watch, her hand on the pistol at her waist. The lock clicked open after 2 tense minutes. Inside, the office smelled of paper and dust. They lit candles and moved quickly to the surveyor's filing cabinets. Lin Mei found the section for land surveys filed in the past 2 years and started pulling documents. "Copy everything related to Montana Trust purchases," she whispered. "We will sort them later." They worked in silence, hands moving fast. Ryder copied survey documents while Lin Mei cross-referenced them against a list of known Montana Trust acquisitions. They found discrepancies immediately. Surveys showing boundary lines that didn't match original deeds, measurements that made properties appear smaller or less valuable than they actually were, notes claiming land defects that other surveys contradicted. "This is systematic," Lin Mei breathed. "Every single survey Montana Trust commissioned has falsified information." "Enough to prove fraud?" Ryder asked. "Enough to prove conspiracy," Lin Mei said. She kept copying, her hand cramping but steady. "These are signed by the same surveyor, a man named Pritchard. He is either incompetent or complicit." They worked for an hour, copying 17 surveys. Just as Lin Mei was returning the final document to its file, they heard voices outside. Ryder doused the candle immediately. They crouched behind the desk, barely breathing. The voices grew closer. 2 men, talking casually about the fire. "Probably just drifters," one said, "always causing trouble." "Marshall should run them out," the other replied. "Town doesn't need that element." The voices passed. Ryder and Lin Mei waited another 5 minutes in darkness before relighting the candle and finishing their work. They replaced every document exactly as they'd found it, checked that nothing looked disturbed, then slipped out the back door and locked it behind them. By the time they reached their horses tied in an alley 3 blocks away, the fire had been extinguished and people were returning to their homes. Weatherly met them at a prearranged spot outside town. "Get what you needed?" he asked. "Everything," Lin Mei said, patting the satchel, now heavy with copied surveys. "Enough to bury Montana Trust in its own deception." They rode back to the ranch and spent the next day organizing the copied surveys into a coherent presentation. Lin Mei created a comparison chart showing original property boundaries versus Montana Trust surveyed boundaries, with discrepancies highlighted. The pattern was undeniable. Every survey inflated defects or minimized value, creating justification for lowball offers. "Pritchard signed all of them," Ryder said, studying the documents. "He's the key. If Jameson can get him to testify, he will break under pressure," Lin Mei said with certainty. "Men who commit fraud for money have no loyalty beyond self-preservation. Offer him immunity and he will tell everything." 2 days later, they made the journey back to Helena. This time they rode openly, not hiding their purpose. Mercer would know by now that they'd been to the territorial attorney's office. There was no point in pretending otherwise. Jameson received them immediately this time, his expression sharp with anticipation. "You have the surveys?" Lin Mei placed the satchel on his desk and pulled out the organized documentation. 17 falsified land surveys, all signed by surveyor Benjamin Pritchard, all commissioned by Montana Trust, all used to justify fraudulent land acquisitions. Jameson spread the documents across his desk, comparing originals to copies, reading Lin Mei's annotations. His face grew progressively harder as he absorbed the scope of the fraud. "This is exactly what I needed," he said finally. "Documentary evidence of systematic conspiracy. Combined with the testimony you already provided, this is sufficient for arrest warrants." "How soon?" Ryder asked. "I'll have warrants issued today for Silas Mercer and Benjamin Pritchard. I'll also request investigation authority for Montana Trust's operations in Denver, though that'll take longer." Jameson looked up at them. "You understand this is just the beginning? The trial will take months. Montana Trust will fight every step, and there will be retaliation." "We understand," Lin Mei said, "but at least we are fighting back now instead of waiting to be destroyed." Jameson stood and extended his hand to Ryder, then to Lin Mei. "You've done good work. Dangerous work, but necessary. I'll make sure the court recognizes your courage." "We do not want recognition," Lin Mei said quietly. "We want justice, and we want our valley to be free of men who believe power gives them the right to destroy others." "You'll get both," Jameson said. "I promise you that." The warrants were executed 3 days later. Ryder and Lin Mei were at the ranch when Marshal Brennan arrived with news that Mercer had been arrested in Clemens and was being held pending trial. Pritchard had been arrested in Helena and was already negotiating testimony in exchange for reduced charges. "It's over," Brennan said, standing in their kitchen with his hat in his hands. "Mercer's done. Montana Trust's activities in this territory are suspended pending investigation. You won." But Ryder knew better. The arrest was a victory, but the war wasn't over. Montana Trust still had lawyers, money, and influence. The trial would be brutal. And even if Mercer was convicted, there would be others ready to continue what he'd started. He looked at Lin Mei, saw the same knowledge in her eyes. But he also saw determination, resilience, and the absolute refusal to back down now that they'd come this far. "Thank you, Marshal," Lin Mei said. "When does the trial begin?" 6 weeks. Territorial Court in Helena. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "You'll both need to testify. So will the other families. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing is easy," Lin Mei said. "We will be ready." After Brennan left, Ryder and Lin Mei stood on their porch watching the sun set over the valley. The barn they'd rebuilt stood solid against the twilight. The cattle grazed peacefully. The land stretched out before them, no longer threatened by the shadow of Mercer's ambition. "We should celebrate," Ryder said. "We should prepare," Lin Mei countered. "The trial will require testimony, documentation, coordination with other families. We have 42 days to ensure our case is unbreakable." Ryder pulled her close. "You know you're allowed to rest, right? To enjoy a victory, even a small one?" Lin Mei leaned into him, and for a moment she let herself be still. "I will rest when it is finished, when Mercer is convicted, when Montana Trust is driven from our valley, when we are truly safe." "That might take a while." "Then I will be busy for a while." She looked up at him, and despite the exhaustion in her face, her eyes were fierce and bright. "But I'm not afraid anymore, Ryder. I was afraid when I arrived, afraid I would fail, afraid you would reject me, afraid I was not strong enough for this life. Now I know I am strong enough. We are strong enough. Together." Ryder kissed her forehead, tasting salt and dust and determination. "Yeah, we are." The trial would come. The fight would continue. But standing there with Lin Mei in his arms and their ranch solid beneath their feet, Ryder felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The 6 weeks before the trial passed like a storm gathering strength. Ryder and Lin Mei worked with Territorial Attorney Jameson's office to prepare testimony, organize evidence, and coordinate with the other families who'd been victimized by Montana Trust. Each week brought new challenges: witnesses who got cold feet, documents that needed verification, legal maneuvers from Montana Trust lawyers attempting to delay or dismiss the case. But Lin Mei moved through it all with the precision of someone who understood that justice was built one careful step at a time. She traveled to each family personally, sitting in their kitchens and living rooms, listening to their fears and reinforcing their resolve. "They're counting on us to break," she told Mrs. Carlson during one such visit, "to decide that fighting is too hard, too dangerous, too uncertain. But we have already survived the worst they could do to us: the fire, the theft, the threats. We are still here. And that means we have already won the part that matters most." "What part is that?" Mrs. Carlson asked. "We refuse to disappear," Lin Mei said simply. "That is the victory they cannot take from us." The word spread through the community of displaced ranchers like fire through dry grass. By the time the trial date arrived, all 7 families had committed to testifying, and 3 others who'd been too afraid to come forward initially had added their voices to the case. The trial opened on a cold morning in late April. Helena's territorial courthouse was packed with spectators, ranchers who'd traveled from across Montana to watch, journalists from newspapers in 3 territories, lawyers and land speculators curious to see if Montana Trust's model of aggressive acquisition would survive legal scrutiny. Ryder and Lin Mei sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, dressed in their best clothes, hands clasped together. Across the aisle, Silas Mercer sat between 2 expensive lawyers from Denver, his face carved from stone, eyes scanning the courtroom like he was counting enemies and measuring weaknesses. Judge Harold Wickham entered, a man in his 60s with iron gray hair and a reputation for fairness that had survived 30 years on the bench. He called the court to order, and the trial began. Jameson opened with a statement that laid out Montana Trust's systematic campaign of fraud, intimidation, and arson. He spoke for 20 minutes, his voice measured and relentless, building a picture of corporate conspiracy so detailed and damning that the courtroom fell silent. "The evidence will show," Jameson concluded, "that Montana Trust and Development, acting through Silas Mercer and others, engaged in a calculated scheme to defraud honest ranchers of their property through falsified surveys, deliberate destruction of property, and threats of violence. This was not business. This was theft dressed in paperwork and backed by fire." A Montana Trust's lead attorney, a smooth-faced man named Caldwell, countered with the argument that his clients were simply capitalizing on legitimate opportunities in a competitive market. Mr. Mercer made fair offers to families who chose to sell. If some properties experience misfortune before those sales, that is tragedy, not conspiracy. The prosecution will ask you to see patterns where only coincidence exists. The first week of testimony established the pattern. Mrs. Carlson took the stand and described finding her barn burning, the doors barred from outside, horses screaming inside. She described Mercer's visit the next day with an offer so low it felt like mockery. He said we should take it while we could, she testified, voice shaking but steady. Said winter would finish what the fire started. Said no one would blame us for leaving. Did you feel threatened by Mr. Mercer? Jameson asked. I felt like a woman whose home had just burned was being told to accept pennies on the dollar, or face worse, Mrs. Carlson said. Yes, I felt threatened. Caldwell cross-examined aggressively, suggesting the fire could have started from a dozen innocent causes, that Mercer's timing was coincidental, that Mrs. Carlson's interpretation was colored by grief and desperation. Isn't it true, Caldwell said, that you and your husband were already struggling financially before the fire? We were managing, Mrs. Carlson said. Managing, but not thriving. In fact, you'd taken a loan against your property 6 months earlier, had you not? We had a bad calving season. A simple yes or no, Mrs. Carlson. Did you take a loan? Yes, but so when Montana Trust made an offer, you were already under financial pressure. The fire was simply the final blow to an already struggling operation. The fire was set deliberately, Mrs. Carlson said, her voice rising, and Silas Mercer knew it because he ordered it. Objection, Caldwell said smoothly. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Wickham said. The witness will stick to what she knows, not what she believes. Mrs. Carlson stepped down looking shaken but defiant. One by one, the other families testified, each describing the same pattern: property damage, immediate offers, implicit threats. Henderson talked about his horses burning alive. Dunbar described finding his fences cut and cattle scattered across 3 counties. Each story added weight to Jameson's case, but Caldwell chipped away at each testimony, finding alternative explanations, suggesting financial desperation rather than victimhood. By the end of the first week, Ryder could feel the jury's uncertainty. The pattern was compelling, but Caldwell had planted doubt about each individual incident. What they needed was someone who could tie it all together, who could testify to the conspiracy from inside. Thomas Colfax took the stand on Monday of the second week. He looked smaller than Ryder remembered, diminished by fear and guilt. But when Jameson asked him to describe his work for Silas Mercer, Colfax's voice was clear and damning. I was hired to do whatever Mr. Mercer needed, Colfax testified. Sometimes that meant ranch work. Sometimes it meant discouraging people from staying in the valley. Can you be more specific about discouraging? Jameson asked. Cutting fences, spooking horses, starting fires. Colfax looked down at his hands. I participated in 3 barn burnings. The Hendersons in September. The Carlsons in November. The Hales in February. Each time, Mr. Mercer gave specific instructions. Bar the doors, use kerosene for fast burn, make it look like an accident. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Wickham banged his gavel for silence. Did Mr. Mercer explain why he wanted these barns burned? Jameson asked. He said Montana Trust needed the properties and the owners were being stubborn. Said fire was the quickest way to change their minds. Colfax finally looked up, and his face was haggard. He said it was just business. Caldwell's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked Colfax's credibility, his criminal history, his immunity deal with the prosecution. Isn't it true that you're testifying to avoid prison yourself? Yes, Colfax said. And isn't it true that you have no direct knowledge of Montana Trust's involvement, only Mr. Mercer's alleged statements? I know what Mercer told me. What Mr. Mercer allegedly told you. But you never met anyone from Montana Trust's corporate office, did you? Never received written orders? Never saw documentation of this supposed conspiracy? No, but so your testimony is simply the word of a confessed arsonist trying to save his own skin by implicating a successful businessman. I'm telling the truth, Colfax said, voice cracking. Mercer ordered those fires. I'm guilty of setting them, but I didn't plan them. He did. Despite Caldwell's attacks, Colfax's testimony landed hard. The jury had heard abstract accusations for a week. Now they were hearing direct confession of criminal conspiracy. Ryder saw doubt shifting to conviction in several jurors' faces, but Montana Trust wasn't finished fighting. On Wednesday, Caldwell called Benjamin Pritchard, the surveyor who'd falsified documents. Pritchard had taken a plea deal, testimony in exchange for suspended sentence, and he confirmed that Mercer had paid him to alter survey results. "How many surveys did you falsify for Mr. Mercer?" Caldwell asked. "None," Pritchard said. The courtroom went silent. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Caldwell said. "I said none. I never falsified any surveys for Silas Mercer." Pritchard looked at the jury. "I may have made some errors in my measurements. Surveying is an imperfect science, but I never deliberately altered results." Jameson was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this witness signed a sworn statement admitting to systematic falsification of land surveys on behalf of Montana Trust." "That statement was coerced," Caldwell interrupted. "My client will testify that he was pressured by the prosecution to implicate Mr. Mercer in exchange for avoiding prison. When given time to reflect, he realized he could not in good conscience perjure himself." Judge Wickham's face darkened. "Counselor, are you saying your client committed perjury in his sworn statement to this court?" "I'm saying my client was intimidated into signing a false confession," Caldwell said smoothly. "He's now correcting that error." The courtroom exploded. Jameson was shouting objections. Judge Wickham was banging his gavel. Ryder felt Lin Mei's hand grip his so tight it hurt. "Montana Trust got to him," she whispered. "They paid him or threatened him or both." It took 20 minutes to restore order. Judge Wickham ruled that Pritchard's current testimony contradicted his sworn statement, and both would be presented to the jury for evaluation. But the damage was done. Montana Trust had created reasonable doubt about a key witness. That night, back in their boarding house room, Lin Mei paced like a caged animal. They are buying their way out, intimidating witnesses, twisting the truth. "Jameson still has the falsified surveys," Ryder said, "the pattern of acquisitions, the other testimonies." "It is not enough." Lin Mei stopped pacing and turned to him. "We need something Caldwell cannot twist or explain away. Something that proves conspiracy so clearly that even Montana Trust's money cannot obscure it." "What we need is Halstead," Ryder said. "The man in Denver who actually runs Montana Trust's operations. Get him on the stand and the whole conspiracy unravels." "Halstead is in Denver, outside Montana's jurisdiction," Lin Mei said. "Jameson tried to subpoena him. Montana Trust's lawyers blocked it." "Then we need someone else from inside Montana Trust, someone who can testify to Halstead's orders, to the company's strategy, Ryder stopped. "The letters." "What letters?" "When Mercer approached me with offers, he sometimes referenced instructions from the company, letters from Denver. I never saw them, but if they exist, if Montana Trust kept correspondence about the Valley operations, it would be smoking gun evidence," Lin Mei finished. Her eyes went bright. "But where would such letters be?" "Mercer's ranch office, or Montana Trust's Helena branch." Ryder stood. "We need to find out." They went to Jameson the next morning with their theory. He listened, then shook his head. "I can't authorize a search without probable cause. And Montana Trust will argue any correspondence is privileged business communication." "Even if that communication orders arson and fraud?" Lin Mei asked. "Even then, unless we can prove what's in the letters before we search for them. It's a circular problem." Jameson rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "I'm doing everything I can with what we have. But Montana Trust lawyers are good, and they're making this case about witness credibility instead of evidence. If the jury decides to believe Pritchard's recantation, to doubt Colfax's confession, we could lose." "What are our chances?" Ryder asked. "Honestly, 50-50. Maybe worse after Pritchard's reversal." They left the meeting in grim silence. The trial was entering its third week, and momentum had shifted. What had felt like inevitable conviction now felt dangerously uncertain. That afternoon, Lin Mei disappeared for 3 hours. When she returned to the boarding house, she had a determined expression Ryder had learned to recognize. "What did you do?" he asked. "I spoke with other Chinese families in Helena," she said. "Asked if anyone had worked in Montana Trust offices, knew people who worked there, had connections to the business community." And I found someone, a woman named Chen Wei, who works as a cleaning woman in Montana Trust's Helena branch office. She says she has seen correspondence between Halstead in Denver and Mercer, letters discussing property acquisitions in our valley. Ryder felt hope surge. Will she testify? She is afraid. If Montana Trust discovers she has been talking, she will lose her position, but she is willing to help if we can protect her. Lin Mei paused. She says the letters are kept in a locked cabinet in the branch manager's office, filed under Valley Operations. But can she get access? She has keys to clean the office at night, but she cannot remove documents without being caught. Someone would have to copy them there. Ryder understood what she was suggesting. You want to break into Montana Trust's office. I want to obtain evidence that will convict the people who tried to destroy us, Lin Mei said. If that requires accessing an office after hours, then yes. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than letting Mercer walk free? More dangerous than watching Montana Trust's lawyers dismantle our case piece by piece? Lin Mei's voice was fierce. We are so close, Ryder. We cannot stop now because we are afraid of risk. Ryder thought about everything they'd already risked. Their ranch, their safety, their lives. Thought about the other families counting on them for justice. Thought about what it would mean if Montana Trust won, if corporate corruption could operate with impunity, if people like Mercer could burn and steal and threaten without consequence. All right, he said. When? Tonight. Chen Wei works the late shift starting at midnight. She will let us in. They met Chen Wei at 11:30 behind Montana Trust's office building. She was a small woman in her 40s, worn down by hard work, but with sharp, intelligent eyes. She handed Lin Mei a ring of keys without speaking, then led them to a side entrance. Inside, the office was dark and silent. Chen Wei pointed to a door at the end of a hallway. Branch manager's office, filing cabinet on the left wall, locked drawer labeled Regional Operations. How long do we have? Ryder asked. I finish cleaning at 2. Someone comes by at 2:30 to check the building. You must be gone by then. They had less than 3 hours. Ryder and Lin Mei entered the manager's office while Chen Wei kept watch in the hallway. Ryder picked the cabinet lock while Lin Mei lit a small lamp, keeping it shielded. Inside the drawer, they found exactly what Chen Wei had promised. Folders of correspondence between Halstead and the Helena branch, organized by region. The Clemens Valley folder was thick. They worked in tense silence, Lin Mei reading each letter quickly and marking the most damning for copying. Ryder transcribed as fast as his hand could move. The letters were extraordinary in their casual criminality. Halstead discussing problem properties that needed pressure. Mercer reporting on discouragement operations. References to paying the surveyor for flexible assessments. One letter stopped Lin Mei cold. Listen to this, she whispered, and read aloud. The Hale property remains resistant despite standard pressure tactics. Recommend escalation to property destruction. The Chinese wife may provide leverage if legal options fail. Suggest emphasizing her vulnerable position to encourage cooperation. Ryder felt fury rise like bile. They'd threatened Lin Mei directly, discussed using her as leverage, reduced her to a tactical weakness to exploit. Copy that one, he said through clenched teeth. They copied 17 letters in total, each one more damning than the last. By 1:45, they had everything they needed. They returned the originals to exact positions, relocked the cabinet, and slipped out the way they'd come. Chen Wei was waiting. You got what you needed? More than we hoped, Lin Mei said. She pressed money into the woman's hand, more than Ryder had thought they could afford. Thank you. You have helped bring justice. Justice does not pay rent, Chen Wei said quietly. But it is good to know some people still fight for it. The next morning, Jameson stared at the copied letters like he was holding dynamite. Where did you get these? Does it matter? Lin Mei asked. If Montana Trust claims they were obtained illegally, they were obtained from a business office by someone with legitimate access, Lin Mei said carefully. No locks were broken. No property was stolen. We simply reviewed documents and made notes. Jameson looked at her for a long moment, clearly understanding what she wasn't saying. Finally, he nodded. I'll enter these as evidence. Montana Trust will fight it, but the content is too specific to be fabricated. This could turn the trial. It did. When Jameson presented the letters in court the next day, the defense table erupted in objections. Caldwell demanded to know how the documents were obtained, claimed they were privileged communications, argued they were inadmissible. Judge Wickham reviewed the letters in his chambers for 2 hours. When he returned, his face was set. These documents appear to be authentic business correspondence discussing illegal activities. Whatever questions exist about how they were obtained, their content is relevant to this trial. I'm allowing them as evidence. Jameson read selected passages to the jury. With each letter, the case became clear. This wasn't pattern or coincidence. This was documented conspiracy. Halstead ordering pressure tactics. Mercer reporting on arson. The surveyor being paid for falsification. The targeting of the Hale property and the specific mention of using Lin Mei as leverage. Ryder watched the jury's faces shift from skepticism to shock to anger. This was what they'd needed. Proof so direct that even Montana Trust's lawyers couldn't spin it away. Caldwell tried. He argued the letters were taken out of context, that business language often sounded aggressive without criminal intent, that Halstead and Mercer were simply discussing competitive acquisition strategies. But when Jameson called Lin Mei to the stand and asked her to read the letter about using her as leverage, her quiet dignity demolished any suggestion of innocent business practice. "They wrote about me like I was a tool to manipulate my husband," she said, voice steady. "Not a person, not a wife. Just a weakness to exploit because I am Chinese and vulnerable. That is not business. That is cruelty, given corporate approval." The courtroom was absolutely silent. In his closing argument, Jameson presented the full picture: testimony from victims, confession from Colfax, falsified surveys despite Pritchard's recantation, and now direct evidence of conspiracy from Montana Trust's own correspondence. "This case is about whether corporations can operate above the law," he told the jury. "Whether money and lawyers can excuse arson, fraud, and intimidation. The evidence is clear. Montana Trust, acting through Silas Mercer, engaged in systematic criminal activity. The only question is whether you have the courage to hold them accountable." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict in a voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit arson, we find the defendant Silas Mercer guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of criminal intimidation, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. Ryder pulled Lin Mei close as tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of release, of vindication, of justice finally delivered. Around them, the other families embraced and wept and celebrated. Mercer sat frozen as bailiffs approached to take him into custody. His lawyers were already talking about appeals, but Judge Wickham's sentencing 2 weeks later left little room for hope. 15 years in territorial prison, restitution to all affected families, and permanent ban from Montana Territory upon release. But the victory went beyond Mercer's conviction. Montana Trust faced federal investigation. Halstead was indicted in Denver, and the territorial legislature passed new laws requiring verification of land surveys and prohibiting coercive acquisition tactics. The case became precedent across the West, cited whenever corporations tried to pressure small landholders. For Ryder and Lin Mei, the trial's end meant something simpler. They could finally go home. The ranch welcomed them back with spring green spreading across the valley and wildflowers pushing through the last patches of snow. The rebuilt barn stood solid. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the mountains rose behind it all like silent witnesses to everything they'd survived. They worked through summer with a different energy, not the desperate scramble of survival, but the steady rhythm of building something meant to last. Lin Mei organized the Valley Ranchers into a cooperative that shared resources and information, preventing any single family from being isolated and vulnerable. Ryder taught ranching skills while Lin Mei taught accounting and record-keeping, making sure every family could defend their property through documentation as well as determination. In August, Jim Weatherly and 6 other ranchers showed up at the Hale Ranch with wagons full of lumber. "What's this?" Ryder asked. "Help," Weatherly said simply. "You rebuilt your barn alone after the fire. Figured this time you shouldn't have to." Over 3 days, the community built a new barn, twice the size of the original, solid and proud. They raised the frame together, women and men working side by side. And when the final beam was set, someone brought out a fiddle, and they celebrated until the stars came out. Lin Mei stood in Ryder's arms, watching neighbors dance and laugh, and she thought about the frightened woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach 7 months ago. That woman seemed like someone from another life. Are you happy? Ryder asked quietly. I am content, Lin Mei said. Happiness is momentary. Contentment is built. And I have helped build this. As autumn painted the valley gold and crimson, word came that Montana Trust had dissolved, its assets seized for restitution. The families they'd defrauded received settlements, not full value, but enough to restart. The Carlsons bought a small property near town. The Hendersons returned to ranching on land they purchased with their settlement. Others scattered to new opportunities, but all carried the knowledge that they'd stood against power and won. On a cold October evening, Lin Mei discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryder while they were feeding horses, the news falling into the quiet stable like a stone into still water. He stopped mid-motion, looked at her, and saw everything, fear and hope and determination and love. A child, he said, in this life. In this life, Lin Mei confirmed, in this valley, in this home we have built together. Ryder set down the feed bucket and pulled her close, overcome by the weight of it, that this woman who'd been a stranger had become his partner, his equal, the person who'd taught him that survival was just the beginning of strength. Are you afraid? He asked. Always, Lin Mei said, but no longer of the things I used to fear. I am not afraid of being alone, or of failing, or of not being strong enough. I am only afraid of ordinary things now, illness, accidents, the everyday dangers of living. Those fears I can manage. We can manage, Ryder corrected. Yes, Lin Mei said, smiling, we can manage. Their daughter was born in May, delivered by the doctor from Clemens with Mrs. Carlson and Mrs. Henderson helping. They named her Sarah May, honoring Ryder's first wife, and Lin Mei's mother, tying together the past that had shaped them and the future they were creating. Lin Mei held the baby in the cabin they'd defended, surrounded by the community they'd helped save, and felt the extraordinary weight of an ordinary life. This was what they'd fought for, not glory or recognition or even justice, though justice had come. They'd fought for the right to build something that would last, to raise a child in a valley where power didn't mean the freedom to destroy others. Years passed with the steady accumulation of seasons. The ranch prospered. Sarah grew strong and curious, learning to ride almost before she could walk, following her father through the valley and her mother through the account books. Other children came, a son named James, another daughter they called Lily. The valley changed too. The railroad came through 5 years after the trial, but instead of displacing ranchers, the cooperative Lin Mei had organized negotiated fair land sales and equitable access to shipping. The town grew, new families arrived, and the story of the trial became legend. The Chinese bride and the scarred rancher who'd stood against corporate corruption and won. But to Ryder and Lin Mei, it was never legend. It was just their life, difficult, precious, earned through hardship, and defended with everything they had. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Sarah was teaching James to rope fence posts while Lily chased chickens with the pure joy of someone who'd never known a day without safety. Do you ever think about that first day? Ryder asked. When you stepped off the stagecoach and I told you to leave? Sometimes, Lin Mei said, but not with regret. If it had been easy, we would not value it so highly. I was a fool. You were afraid, Lin Mei corrected. There is a difference. Fear is reasonable. Letting fear control you is foolish. You learned the difference. So did I. Ryder looked at her, silver threading through her black hair now, lines around her eyes from squinting into sun and wind, hands scarred from work and weather. She was more beautiful to him than she'd been that first day, because now he understood that beauty without strength was nothing, and strength without purpose was waste. I love you, he said. I know, Lin Mei said. You show me every day, in work, in patience, in the way you teach our children to be strong and kind. Love is not something you say, it is something you build. As the sun set over the Montana Valley, painting the mountains red and gold, they stood together and watched their children play in the world they'd made safe. The barn stood solid, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the land stretched out before them, no longer threatened, no longer contested, simply home. They'd come to this valley as strangers bound by contract. They'd survived fire and intimidation and the weight of corporate power trying to crush them. They'd stood in courtrooms and faced down men who believed money made them invincible. They'd fought not just for land, but for the principle that ordinary people deserved dignity, safety, and the right to build lives that couldn't be stolen by those with more power. And they'd won. Not perfectly, not without cost, but completely enough that when Ryder and Lin Mei were remembered in the valley, and they were for generations, people spoke of them not as victims who'd survived, but as fighters who'd refused to accept that survival was all they deserved. They'd demanded more. They'd built more. And in building it, they'd changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after, everyone who learned that resistance was possible, that justice could be won, that love born in hardship could grow stronger than love born in comfort. As night fell over their ranch, their children finally came inside, tired and happy. Lin Mei served supper while Ryder told stories about the valley's history, about the families who'd fought together, about the importance of standing up when standing up was hard. After the children were asleep, Ryder and Lin Mei sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and neither spoke because words weren't necessary. They'd said everything that mattered through the life they'd built, the family they'd raised, the valley they'd helped save. Outside, the Montana night was vast and star-filled. The mountains stood eternal. The valley slept in peace. And on a ranch that had nearly been stolen, in a home that had been defended with courage and cunning and love, two people who'd started as strangers rested together, not as survivors, but as victors, not as victims, but as partners who'd proven that the strongest foundation for any future was built on the refusal to surrender what mattered most. Their story was over. Their life continued. And in the valley they'd fought to keep, that was exactly as it should be.